Everybody agrees that junk food is unhealthy, right? I mean, it's right in the name, junk. It's going to make you feel like junk. Why? Why is junk food unhealthy? The big picture is something that no one's talking about, and it is the hateful eight seed oil. So that's what I call them. That's the defining feature of junk food, because as much as sugar isn't something we need to eat,
canola, corn, cottonseed, soy, sunflower, safflower, grapeseed, and rice bran.
At least we have the technology in our body to deal with large amounts of it, right? If we overconsume sugar, we build body fat, and we can build body fat that functions the way body fat is supposed to function. When we have these seed oils in our diet, this is what I talk about in the Fat Burn Fix. Our body fat is damaged because that's where the seed oils go. They are stored there. And over years and decades of eating them, the concentration builds up to abnormal levels. So we're talking here about polyunsaturated fatty acids. Those are the supposedly healthy kind that Harvard and everybody recommends because saturated fat is bad. These seed oils are super pro-inflammatory because they're so high in polyunsaturated fatty acids, which are unstable, and their chemical instability produces chemical chaos that results in inflammation in our body. And when we have a concentration of these polyunsaturated fatty acids, which you can abbreviate, you can make it less of a mouthful by calling it a PUFA. When we have more than like 10, 20% PUFA in our body fat no longer functions. Your body fat is there to give you energy. It's supposed to energize you. It does a lot of things, and it communicates actually with your brain to tell you, hey, we're good. We got so much energy. The sun just came up, so go enjoy your day. That body fat failure that occurs when we consume seed oils is the underlying cause of the vast majority of chronic diseases. So omega-6 refers to the chemical composition of these things. Like it has its first double bond, 6 carbons in from the end. And omega-3s have their first double bond, 3 carbons in from the end. So the omega-6s are supposedly the more pro-inflammatory, and the omega-3s are supposedly the more anti-inflammatory. And I say supposedly because it's not 100% like that. But the truth is that they do have opposing actions. And so in any kind of stress or alteration that the body undergoes to get back to homeostasis, we have forces from both directions, right? So if we eat a candy bar or an apple or something, our blood sugar goes up and we have insulin pushing it back down, but we have what they call the counter-regulatory hormones pushing it back up, because insulin by itself might push it down too far. And then so you have to have the counter-regulatory hormones. And so you need the anti-inflammatory and the pro-inflammatory also to occur, so that, like, for example, if you prick your finger or something like that, you don't bleed forever and ever. So you need the pro-inflammatory there so that you stop bleeding, because it's a pro-inflammatory forms the clot. But you also need the anti-inflammatory so that little clot doesn't spread throughout your body. So the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio is talked about very, very often. It's very important because we've been eating a lot of soy and corn that have just so much more omega-6 and very little omega-3. And when we're eating animal fats for our source of omega-3, like fish and seal and other animals that were naturally grazed, or like these days, like game animals, many of them have more omega-3 than omega-6. So we're way out of balance on that. But one of the crazy things about this is that it's not just that these things are bad because of the omega-6 to 3 ratio and the pro-inflammatory and anti-inflammatory, because that inflammation doesn't occur it's like not for nothing, like they say in The Sopranos. Something has to happen for that kind of inflammatory cascade to be a problem. The inflammation that I like to bring into the conversation that is a bigger problem is the not biologically functional. They call it non-enzymatic oxidation. And it's just the reaction of the fact that these things are literally unstable, and they tend to just spontaneously not combust, but close to it. They react with oxygen and iron and other metals in our bloodstream and cause free radical cascades and reactive oxygen species. And that leads to inflammation that cannot be controlled with omega-3. So that's kind of like the key missing piece. This kind of inflammation, omega-3 makes it worse. So you can't control this kind of problem by supplementing with fish oil or any kind of omega-3, right? So that's a whole other category of biochemical disaster that just not enough folks are talking about. And I just feel it's so important for everyone to understand this. Everybody talks about inflammation and using antioxidants and controlling inflammation. But if we aren't talking about the number one source of inflammation, we're not talking sense. We're missing the big picture. It's as if everyone was a 4-pack-a-day smoker and we were having, kids have lung cancer and mothers, pregnant women dying of heart attacks and strokes because everyone was smoking from birth. And we're scratching our heads and saying, well, gee, what is it? Maybe it's too many apples, or maybe we need more vitamin D. It's like, no, it's the cigarettes, folks. That is the most pro-inflammatory thing in that particular imaginary scenario. But in this real scenario, we have been participating in a decades-long experiment without knowing it. It's an uncontrolled experiment. We have been in it. What happens when you give human beings so much PUFA that their body fat just doesn't work anymore, and they're always a tinderbox waiting to experience some kind of inflammation? There's groupings of different responses of how we respond to this wildly unhealthy diet. Just like you could say there's groupings of responses to how people respond to too much cigarettes. Some people get lung problems. Some people don't have lung problems. They get heart attacks and strokes instead. Some people get cancer instead. So with these PUFAs, we have groupings of problems, which are autoimmune diseases, cancer, overweight, obesity, fatigue. Those are all related, which ultimately leads to diabetes. It's not that you have a metabolic type that means you have to follow a special diet. It means that these PUFAs that you've been eating, most people have 80% of their fat calories coming from these things unless they're purposefully avoiding them. That leads to a known set of problems that we just all are dealing with. And that was what I dealt with. Every single patient was affected in one way or another when I was working, no matter where I worked, because people just don't know to avoid these things and it makes them sick. My opinion of the medical system is that they want people to be sick. I was on Bill Maher, Real Time with Bill Maher in May. I was the only doctor that he's had on in years talking about diet, nutrition, health, metabolism. 3 weeks after me, and I was saying what I'm saying, seed oil's bad, they're everywhere, we don't know we're eating them, it's an experiment, you've been in it. You can get out of it, but you got to know what you're doing. And then 3 weeks after that, they had a doctor, and what did he say? What does he say about diet? Well, more fruits and vegetables and more vegetable oils. We're not eating enough. I mean, I cannot believe in any part of me that this guy doesn't know what he's doing. Because if this is what he does, he knows that we've been eating more and more of these things. And he gets on national TV and says we should keep doing that and eat more. And the problem is we're not getting enough fruits and vegetables and too much saturated fat. You really have to open your eyes to just how much money is being made from all this and how we are so ingrained in the way things are that you have to be on your toes and you have to be responsible for yourself. You can't count on your doctor to give you good nutrition advice, and you can't, count on school to do it either. What we learned in school was nothing valuable there.
Everything's contextual. Like I said, people will say, well, having high blood glucose is very problematic. But if I exercise really hard, my blood glucose is going to go up. So in context, is that bad? Is inflammation bad? And when I exercise, my inflammation goes up. Is that bad in context? And we have this very delicate balance between oxidants and the antioxidant system. We have, as you're well aware, we have this robust endogenous antioxidant system with glutathione, superoxide dismutase, and many others. So there's this balance, and we're sitting there. We're going to constantly just take these supplements and take antioxidants and continuing our crappy diet. Most seed oils is, tied to heavily processed food. I mean, you go to the grocery store and it's some sort of refined grain, some sort of seed oil, probably soybean oil in the US, and then, maybe some kind of sweetener. I mean, this is kind of if you just walk through the grocery store and pick up boxes, you're going to find that almost routinely. But then there's people that maybe they get their seed oil and they're health conscious and they're eating their healthy salads and they're dumping some sort of, low fat or even regular dressing on there. And the dressing is, again, almost always soybean oil, canola oil, as you know. I mean, it's just garbage. And so do we see, like, the people eating the donuts and the potato chips are going to be doing worse because they're combining not only the seed oils, but now they have the processed garbage devoid of any nutrition food versus the ones that may not be doing quite as bad by eating the salad with the seed oil on that. Soybean oil is actually past beef as a source of calories. Americans eat more calories in soybean oil than they do beef. You've got guys from, Harvard School of Epidemiology or Public Health constantly saying seed oil, eat the canola oil. It's so great for you. And I think the primary endpoint they're looking at is because it reduces LDL to some degree. And I think that's the whole argument.
So that's the genius of Ansel Keys, is that he came up with this idea that saturated fat raised your LDL and that was bad. Like, I don't know if he came up with that second part on his own. I think he had a lot of help, but I don't believe that's bad anymore. I used to, of course, that's what we learn. Then I went through an in-between phase where I was ambivalent about it. And now I'm not, so in other words, we need to have plenty of LDL. What LDL does is something special, that it actually feeds the immune system more directly than the other lipoproteins. If you don't have high LDL and you're trying to fight off an infection, you can't make white blood cells. And that's basically what they found is that those folks who had the lowest LDL, they did not mount a good immune response, and they died. The seed oils lower your LDL, and they do that by poisoning the whole thing that I call a lipid cycle, which is how these fats circulate in your body. I talk about that in both my books. If you think about it for a second, why would LDL be bad and HDL be good? I mean, why would nature do it that way? Like, it's there for a reason, just like cholesterol, just like we need cholesterol. LDL is there for a function, and it has a specific role in the whole distribution of fats and fat-soluble nutrients in the body, that it has to do with getting cholesterol into cells that need it. So it enables, and cholesterol is necessary for cellular division. What is the most active part of our body in terms of that? Well, for people undergoing an infection, it's the bone marrow and your white blood cells and your lymph nodes. You need to be able to rapidly, they make millions, your bone marrow makes millions of white blood cells per second. And cholesterol is like one of the limiting factors that the cell uses to decide, am I ready to divide, as it goes through its phases of cell division. Cholesterol is so basic to cellular life that you need it for reproduction. And this is why our testosterone and our estrogen are based on cholesterol molecules. So nature knows what it's doing. LDL is not bad. It's what's in your lipoprotein particles that makes the difference between whether or not your high triglycerides and your high cholesterol might cause a stroke or not. And by the way, I said high triglycerides, but really you probably won't have high triglycerides unless you've got insulin resistance and a lot of, that which comes from the seed oils. To me, I see a lot of people, when they become fat adapted and when they're producing more ketones, that their LDL and total cholesterol will go up. And that's just because they're burning more body fat. And the way the lipid cycle works is when you're burning more body fat, it makes your LDL go up. It's just a consequence of that metabolic change. It's a totally good thing. What's bad is a high triglyceride to HDL ratio, and that's a whole other conversation, but it totally reverses when you get the seed oils out. You don't even have to have people so much cut back on their fructose and a lot of things that people talk about with causing insulin resistance. But of course, the two combine together and damage your liver, but the seed oils are the worst. And there's so many animal studies that just show that without even a high carb diet, you can give animals, you can create insulin resistance, prediabetes, diabetes, the whole thing, just by altering the fatty acid composition that the animal's eating. help make it easier for people. And so that's what I've been doing at my job, is I walk them through, here's the first step, here's what you need to do. And I love seeing the changes in people's relationships with food. It's just so amazing. Like people who are like, I'm never going to stop drinking soda. You take my soda away and like, I could see like the daggers coming from their eyes at me. You saying I can't have my sweet tea. Like a year later, the same person will come into my office and say, oh, I just decided it wasn't worth it. I don't want to feel that way, because for years I've been suffering and I've been tired and I've been irritable and brain fog and cranky. And when you get that metabolic sugar addiction, you start to cure it. You open your eyes to this whole other world that gives you a whole new relationship with food. And that is like my favorite part of this whole thing. When I see somebody get to that point where they don't even want it anymore, that's when I can check off a big win, you know, for like healthy eating. Knowing the path is one thing, but walking the path is the other. And if you're metabolically addicted to certain foods, you cannot stay on that path. So we have to cure that metabolic addiction. And there's a science to it. And I love putting that science into practice. That's what I'm doing. Just in terms of the food, we just get it to where their body trusts fat. So that's easy. You just start your day with a high fat meal, whether you want to have it at breakfast time or lunchtime, doesn't really matter. But that's the time where sugar is at its most addicting. It does its most damage. The antidote, so like something simple would be what I have every day, which is cream and milk with a little coffee in it. So it's like probably like 400 or 500 calories. Most of it comes from the cream and it's raw and it's so delicious. That's the main reason. Is like it's so much better. It's grass-fed. It has all kind of complex flavors in it, like butterscotch and stuff, because it has all kinds of more nutrition in it. It's mostly fat for breakfast. And then like, let's say somebody is a type 2 diabetic, they might need a tiny bit of like what I call the slow digesting carbs in there. So one of my favorites is Ezekiel bread, because it's a sprouted grain, and those kinds are radically different as far as the way your digestive system breaks them down than the usual flours. So it doesn't cause the same amount of sugar spike. There's still a little sugar spike, but it's not the same amount. And that gives them that sugar so that those folks who really just don't have the receptors yet, or that need, you know, they're so upregulated in their sugar receptors that they need a little bit of sugar, and they're going to be making it out of protein if you don't give them any. So you may as well give them just a little bit. So I give people like around, 60 total grams of carb per day when they're really metabolically damaged. Keep building meals for them. That's what I do. But the most important meal to start out is that breakfast. That's got to be mostly high in fat. I tell them don't snack. That's another battle. I really want them to just focus on building 3 healthy meals. And if you're going to have any kind of a treat, do it later in the day. But that's kind of part of the psychological part, the treat. That's phase 1 of the rehab, is to get to that where you're not snacking and you're getting 60 grams of carbs and no more.